After a COVID pandemic that turned the world on its head, France faces crucial choices over its future. So, with a little less than 7 months before presidential elections, why do identity politics seem to rule the airwaves? For French politics junkies, it's an unsettling start to the campaign. We'll ask our panel about the government's latest announcements on visa restrictions for North Africans and the unfiltered anti-Islam speech of potential candidates vying for a slice of the far-right's electorate. Meanwhile, the left is splintered, with the latest polls putting all of its candidates combined on fewer votes than the far right. What's happened to a country that just 9 years ago elected a socialist president? As for the incumbent, Emmanuel Macron's 2017 strategy of splitting the big tent center-left and center-right parties seems to be working a charm. He's gaining in the polls right now and the clear frontrunner. Right now, what'll be the issues that matter most when the campaign kicks into high gear? In a nation often known for preferring revolution to reform, will it be a vote for change or continuity? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking why this campaign so far seems to be all about identity politics. Joining us, Emmanuel Rivière, Director of International Polling at Kantar Public. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening.
Also joining us, sociologist Nassira Ghenif, professor at Paris 8 University. Nice to see you.
Hello, good morning.
And from Oxford, where he's a visiting scholar, political scientist, Yves Saint-Omer, researcher at the Paris Center for Sociological and Political Research. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Let's begin with that visa row reaction swift after the French government announced slashing the number of visas for Algerians and Moroccans by half. Algeria, which has summoned the French ambassador this Wednesday. Tunisia by 30%, as you can see on this graph. Paris, which insists it's all about the lack of goodwill from across the Mediterranean. We can show you the figures for Algeria, where in the period from the start of the year, you look at the number of deportation requests, more than 7,000, and the number of actual deportations, 22. Emmanuel Macron's hardline interior minister insists it's not at all about the electoral timetable in this country.
We will strongly decrease the number of visas. However, this politics isn't new. The President of the Republic had already done it 2 years ago regarding some countries from the Maghreb. We are doing it because a part of our compatriots, Algerians, Moroccans, Tunisians, are no longer accepted in this country, either because they are radical Islamist people, or because they are criminals, or because they need to leave the national territory. We tell them, as long as you don't take your compatriots back, we will not accept your compatriots.
Nassira Ghenif, your reaction to that decision?
Well, it's not surprising after all. France has, just like Europe, has endeavored to externalize all kind of questions related to migration and immigration, and the fact that they cannot expel as much Algerians, Moroccans, and Tunisians as they would want. Seems to be the perfect timing to kind of make the point that France is being harsh and being having a strong position regarding migration, and especially people that have to be expelled. So it's very timely with the election, unlike what officials are trying to convince us.
Yeah, that's what's confusing here, isn't it? Because on the one hand, the French do have a point. They're not taking back as many as they should under the agreements that were signed. But on the other hand, there's this coincidence of the calendar. A conservative member of parliament, Éric Ciotti, who's officially still a candidate for presidential primaries on the right, he tweeted just a few months before, by the way, next March's 60th anniversary of the Evian Accords that ended the Algerian War of Independence. Let's go further and abridge the Evian Accords, which granted Algeria a special migration status that must be cancelled. Emmanuel Rivière, is this one-upmanship? Again, it's trying to tack as hard as you can to the right?
Yes, and it's a very sensitive topic because there is a set of figures that are regularly spotted by Emmanuel Macron's opponent in the political debate, which are the proportion of illegal immigrants, people that are recognized as illegal immigrants that are still in the French territory. And this is very sensitive because it gives an impression of lack of efficiency. And it's beyond the question of being open or closed to immigration, is being or not capable of controlling who is entering the territory and who is going out. And I think the government has recognized that it's very sensitive not to give the impression of a lack of efficiency. And I fully agree that it is, of course, related to the electoral planning and in the electoral debates.
What's going on in France right now? Why are we only talking about identity politics at the outset of the campaign?
That's quite impressive because if we look at the election results during the last election result, we had election this year, a regional election, the far right did not succeed. But in the political debate, all the themes of the far right, authority, the so-called lack of efficiency of the justice, immigration, and what we call identity, and it's mainly around the Muslims in France, are hot topics in the political debate. But when you look at long-term trends, and we do monitor at Cantar Public the proportion of people in France who consider that there are too many immigrants in the French territory, the proportion is quite high right now. It's 46%. But 15 years ago, it was more than 60%. So there is a tendency of the French population to be less focused on that. And
yet that's all we're talking about.
Yes, and that's all we're talking about.
Why?
Because there is a kind of polarization. And also there is a big stake for Emmanuel Macron to let part of the voters that he has taken from the right go back to the right parties for the next election. So the focus is here, and there is also something particular compared to other issues such as the economy, the debt, and even the climate change. It's highly emotional. And what is highly emotional is very efficient in political debates.
And that is, of course, identity politics. Yves Saint-Omer, we just had an election last Sunday in Germany. There, the far right has pivoted from talking mostly about immigration to more trying to brand itself as the anti-vax party, as the one against COVID passports, for instance. Why is it that in France it's different?
I mean, when you compare French and German politics, it's quite clear that the German one is more what the German called sachlich, more objective, it's less emotional. And although in Germany, as everywhere, there is small politics, coup, and so on, compared to France, it's much less. And to some extent, there were different visions for the future of the country which were debated during German elections. In France, we have a panorama which is more full of small politics, of small coups. And one could perhaps have this hypothesis, because the left is so divided, it's not that a danger for the president. The right is a danger, and the temptation to do a right-wing politics, at least symbolically, is perhaps explainable, understandable, because of this, of this wish to split the right, to have now 3 candidates for the right, the traditional right, the Front National, the Rassemblement National, and the new Zemmour candidacy.
Yeah, we'll talk about Éric Zemmour in a moment, but Yves Saint-Omer, we heard at the outset that clip from the Interior Minister, who's a former deputy chief of staff for Nicolas Sarkozy, the former French president, who, when he was running for re-election, tried to harden his stance more and more, go more and more to the right, and it backfired. So why does Emmanuel Macron have this tough law and order interior minister when elsewhere he's branding himself as a liberal reformer?
At the time of Sarkozy's second campaign, there was a left in France. A very moderate left, something like the third way British Labour, but still, it was sufficiently united to represent an alternative. This is not the case at the time being. And I guess that the difference between Macron and Merkel was that Merkel has more deep values that she would defend whatever the cost. And when she said, "Wir schaffen das," we'll do it for migrants and refugees, it was a deep moral choice. I don't think that the French government at the time being has this deep moral commitment.
There isn't that kind of deep moral commitment. At this point in the conversation, we can bring in Anne-Elisabeth Moudet, columnist for the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Telegraph. Thanks for joining the conversation here on France 24. Anne-Elisabeth, are you surprised that all we're talking about is identity politics right now?
I think it's because nobody would talk about them before. So suddenly a dam has been let loose with the Éric Zemmour, and there are enough people who worried about those questions, and they worried in less extreme ways, but nobody seemed to pay attention. And I think it's a kind of feedback loops in many ways.
But Emmanuel Rivière a few moments ago said on this set that when you ask in opinion surveys, less people than before are interested in these identity questions.
Well, it depends what you call identity questions, because that too is a sort of code word. People worry about immigration and loss of national identity, feeling of national identity where they live. And you can say this is racist, or you can look at something which Christophe Guillouis, the geographer, considers the opinion and a feeling that's unacknowledged for 60% of the population. I don't think Christophe Guillouis is a Zemmourien. He comes from the left. He is a very well-known demographer and geographer. And he says there is the widening swathe of the French population that feels that their concerns about insecurity, their concerns about losing their own identity, and their concern about not being heard are what motivates them. And that's what gives someone like Éric Zemmour traction.
Let's talk about Éric Zemmour. Campaign posters have popped up for the far-right TV talk show pundit. We could show him appearing last Sunday. This was at a Day of Conservatism seminar in the suburbs of Paris. Officially, he's not yet a candidate, but it sure did look like it last Thursday when nearly 4 million viewers tuned in to watch his televised debate with far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon, his unfiltered anti-Islam rhetoric, his embrace of replacement theory and autocrats like Hungary's Viktor Orban, earning him traction. The latest Harris Interactive poll puts him on 13%. That's equal with Mélenchon. And as you can see from this graph, closing in, Marine Le Pen there in that graph is in dark blue, closing in on a fading Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far-right National Rally Party. Nassira Ghanif, how do you explain the Zemmour phenomenon?
I would say it goes all the way back to what we tend to forget, which is the fact that the far right and the National Front started to gain leverage in 1984. So it has been for almost 4 decades, even more. So he's the product of what has happened since then, which is the fact that all parties on all sides have always played the card of immigration, of this sense of loss of identity, and he's the latest byproduct of this deep trend.
But we had seen this change with Marine Le Pen. She wanted to distance herself from her father, calling for more social policies, trying to legitimize the national rally movement, got her into the second round of the presidential election last time around. Why do we have this candidate or this potential candidate suddenly emerging, trying to outflank her on the far right?
Maybe it's because Zemmour understands that there's some space, there's a void there that can be filled with his rhetoric of great replacement, of reclaiming some sort of a French identity that does not exist anymore anywhere. And to be more precise, I think that identity politics, the way he plays it out, is not so much about migration. It's not so much about the others than it is about who is French and who can be French for the next century or so. So he plays the game, or he plays with the fire in some sort, in trying to give what others are not able to word out, which is who is supposed to be French and who is entitled to be French. And for that purpose, interestingly, I think that Marine Le Pen just decided that in her program, she would promote something calling the national priority. That sounds very much like the national preference of her father. So she tries to present herself as someone who has changed. But so far, I think that Zemmour and Le Pen are playing the same game and trying to gain the same votes for the next election.
Very briefly, before we go to the break, Emmanuel Rivière, people watching France from the outside, they saw the Yellow Vests movement and the argument over inequality and Paris being out of touch with what was going on in other parts of the country. Then there was the COVID pandemic and the fears allayed by that. And yet here we are having a discussion about who's French and who's not French.
Yes. What I share, I'm not fully aligned with what Anne-Elisabeth said, but what I fully shared is that there is a very strong feeling of decline in France. There is something very specific. And when you look at the Eurobarometer survey, France is in a very specific position regarding the lack of trust, the lack of trust in the elite, in particular, the lack of trust, the elite, sorry, and the lack of trust regarding the media as well. And France is asking key questions about its future, and many people are feeling that they are not recognized enough, that they are not considered enough, and there is a very, very difficult relationship between citizens and people that are ruling the country. This is what explains the anger against the government.
We're going to pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. It's early days in the French presidential race. The first round is in early April, the second round in late April. For now, sucking the oxygen in the political room is the far right, with Marine Le Pen, who was in the final last time, and the TV political pundit Éric Zemmour. We're talking about it with Emmanuel Rivière, Director of International Polling at Kantar Public, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, columnist at the Daily Telegraph and Sunday Telegraph, sociologist Nassira Ghanif, professor at Paris 8 University, and we're also in the company of political scientist Yves Saint-Omer, researcher at the Paris Center for Sociological and Political Research. Marine Le Pen, who was in the runoff in 2017, she up until very recently seemed like a shoo-in to finish at least second next year. Now she has to watch her right flank.
I haven't heard many concrete solutions from Éric Zemmour. I heard the same statements of facts I've often heard, since once again we're the ones who carried it for decades. I've heard him state these facts, it's true, without nuance. But once again, the time for stating facts is in the past, and I think that's been the case for many years.
Emmanuel Rivière, could Marine Le Pen not reach the second round of the presidential election? Could she fail to get to the second round now?
Absolutely. That is a key question, and this is a question she's trying to answer, which is a question of credibility. For the second time this year during the regional election, her party failed to win a region. It was close, but not so close this time, and it was a problem for her 5 years ago, because she has demonstrated that it's very difficult for Rassemblement National to win in an election higher than a local community. And this is a great danger for her, because her voters who don't want Emmanuel Macron to be re-elected will start to consider who else could win against Emmanuel Macron in the second round. So this is why the battle around credibility is quite important when polls are showing that Éric Zemmour is a strong competitor now for Marine Le Pen.
And Elisabeth Moutet, I know that in lots of newsrooms we're grappling over this question of whether or not this is, journalists giving airtime to somebody who says stuff that's outrageous and therefore draws eyeballs.
I'm with Nicolas Sarkozy on this one. I don't necessarily like what Éric Zemmour says, but as long as it's not illegal, why? And he probably will be a candidate. The question of airtime is not ours to decide on. We have a national body for the electronic media and television that says he can't have more than such and such airtime. But having said that, he's an interesting candidate. We have to report about him. My personal feeling is that at one stage, his candidacy will peter out, but right now he has become Donald Trump, and the more you try and cancel him, the more you insult him, the more you field people from the circles of power in France against him in debates, as 3 days ago with, for instance, the arch consultant Alain Marc. And the more he gains traction, the more he gains voices. So the idea that you can stop him speaking and writing, that's not going to work anyway. It's going to make him a hero of people who don't really know him or didn't know him up till now, but decide that if he annoys so many people, he must have something that they like.
Nassira Ghanif, you agree?
Yes, probably. But, I think that maybe one of the strategies that is going on right now is that Marine Le Pen is playing the game of saying that Éric Zemmour is not consistent and he has no way to govern the country. But she knows that at some point, because probably Zemmour will not be able to sustain his candidacy all the way to the election, that she will gain all the votes that he's bringing in the conversation. So in the end, I think that Marine Le Pen and Éric Zemmour are very much allies in the way that they play identity politics and the dangerous game that they are playing. Because let's look at the multicultural French society and consider the harm that they are both doing to the society as it is now. And this is something that we should keep in mind when we look at this kind of game that they are both playing right now.
Let's turn our attention to the incumbent. Inaugurating the renovation of the National Library, France's President Emmanuel Macron didn't name Zemmour, but for the first time he did answer him on Tuesday, calling out the not yet candidate for suggesting that the National Register only recognized first names from the Christian calendar. Macron saying in political debate, we often ask ourselves the question of our identity, but our identity was never built on a narrowing of views, nor on people's first names, nor even on forms of tension, is how he put it. Yves Saint-Omer, your thoughts on Macron weighing in on this?
I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, we are not in the head of President Macron, and we don't know the game he plays. I mean, for him objectively, the emergence of Zemmour in the panorama of the right is a good thing. It should not be too important. We have to remember that Macron himself appeared during the last campaign as the man beyond the parties. And he was not able to build a party of his own with sufficient roots in the country. The fact that now on the right wing, a man appears as somebody beyond the party is not surprising. What is perhaps more surprising is to see how such a low-level discussion could impact that much.
I was going to ask you, because you're sitting in, Yves, you're sitting in Oxford, and, the French have the reputation of being the country of intellectual debate. It's not exactly an intellectual debate we're witnessing here right now. Why is that?
I would say it's the opposite. And I think that it's so easier to take simple issues rather to propose a project for a country which is not in a good state. I mean, which loses its geopolitical power, which is faced with a deep crisis of its political system, which is faced also with the ecological challenge. I mean, to some extent, it's a bit like the English politics. The Brexit, something which was really the future of the country to make UK great again. Is this kind of debate the kind of debate which will allow France to be great again? We can have doubt about this.
What does polling tell you, Emmanuel Rivière, on that score? Do the French want a break? As you heard Yves Saint-Omer say, Emmanuel Macron was effective in 2017 in presenting himself as the anti-system candidate. Or do they want continuity after all the tumult of COVID?
That's the question. Obviously, what the poll said is that Emmanuel Macron has significantly gained support during the COVID crisis. He has gained trust, and when you compare Emmanuel Macron 7 months before the end of his term, compared to his predecessor, is 10 points higher than Nicolas Sarkozy, who almost succeeded in being re-elected. He was defeated, but it was very, very close. So he's in a better position than every of his predecessors. That said,
we've spent a lot of time over the past years saying how the French find him too haughty. There's so many people feel he's out of touch, and yet you're saying he's gaining in popularity?
He has gained popularity during and because of the COVID crisis, despite of the contestation they had, but continuously people did express some kind of anger against the decision, but they mostly supported the decision. What is happening right now, and probably one of the reasons why, if I may try to get into Emmanuel Macron's head, is not occupied so much the attention as the people who have been talking about Eric Zemmour, Marine Le Pen, but there was also the primary election for the Greens, there is the discussion for choosing the candidate for Les Républicains, and probably Emmanuel Macron wants to take back the initiative. Continuously, during his mandate, he has claimed to organize the debate between him and Marine Le Pen, between his representation of France that can be successful in the world and what he designed as being a very conservative and anti-opening way of seeing things. And probably he needs now to reaffirm what will be his position for the term to come.
And Elisabeth Moutet, are you surprised that Macron has gained in the polls of late?
I think right now the situation is such that even with people having gripes against him, we haven't seen the last of whatever new iteration of the yellow vest. We'll see. We had people demonstrating against the health pass, but at the end of the day, it's been more or less accepted by people who didn't want so much fuss. And so he's got this gives people this feeling of permanence. He also right now has been fairly consensual. He's also distributing money left, right, and center. The latest I noticed is suddenly tips for people in the hospitality industry and others will not be taxed anymore. 20 years ago, the tips were added to our bills in restaurants precisely because the taxman wanted to get at them. And you can see that right now he's essentially doing what the old ancient Rome politicians were doing. He's spreading money about. It's a series of things. I think it's early days in the campaign. We are not even in October. We'll see whether things go better or worse in the winter. And how France is going to deal with the national debt. But the other candidates are so lackluster that there's no sort of consensual character that crops up either on the left or on the right. And so Macron is the man who's there, and the incumbent always has benefits from that.
Of course, he would be the first French president of the Fifth Republic to win re-election while having a sitting majority, which would be a first. Let's get the latest from the left right now. We had on Tuesday a pragmatic pipping an idealist in the runoff of the Green Party primary. The Greens on 6% in the polls before the result that went the way of Yannick Jadot. And his rival, who promised, his rival Sandrine Rousseau, who promised to coalesce and to steer the conversation away from all these identity politics we've been talking about.
As you can see, the presidential campaign promises to be tough, brutal, and dirty. Too many candidates favour invective over argument, lies over complexity, incivility over respect for others. In the coming campaign, we, the Greens, will not allow the far right to decide the terms of the campaign.
Yves Saint-Omer, I go back to that Germany comparison. The Greens there finished on 15%. The French Greens, according to that poll we showed earlier, somewhere around 6%. And you heard earlier in the conversation Emmanuel Rivière saying how the climate emergency is one of the big issues that's going to be high on the minds of voters. Why is it that these left-wing issues, inequality, climate change, which the Greens say they incarnate, aren't getting more traction yet?
I mean, I think that the answer is different for the social topic and the ecological one.
Right.
For the social topics, those who should have embodied social justice, namely the left, the traditional left, has completely failed when they were in the power. And the Socialist Party is far from having regained a legitimacy on this issue. And for the ecology, the Greens have done quite well at local level and regional level. And we could say that at this level, the Green Party, the French Green Party, is not that different from the German Green Party. What is missing is the national level. And for the national level, we can have explanations about what kind of party the Green Party is. It's a small party, weak, but there is also a problem of personality in a state of politics where big projects, where parties are not very credible, then the personality of somebody, of the candidate, wins all the attention. And at the time being, there is no such charismatic personality within the Green Party. It was also the case in Germany to some extent, but the strength of the German Greens compensated this problem.
Yeah, you were running for members of parliament, not for president. So you hear Nassira again, Yves Saint-Omer say the French presidential election is a popularity contest. And again, we saw those poll numbers earlier. If you combine the votes of the Greens, the Socialists, the far left of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, they don't even add up to what the far right would get if the election were held tomorrow. So again, the question is, where's the left gone in France? France has a long tradition of left-wing politics. Where have they gone?
Well, they seem to be lost somewhere in translation that they are not able to word out. This will be the major challenge for them during these elections. And who knows, like in Germany, maybe 2 days before the first round, you will have Greta Thunberg coming to Paris and saying that the climate change is a major issue and she will help rise the figure of the Green Party, of Les Verts, so that they will be in a position to influence what goes on for the second round. This would be the best that could happen. But so far, I think that there is a matter of disorientation regarding the left. It's very difficult to understand, and maybe they were kind of caught in this kind of obsession of the rhetoric of the far right. And they need to really escape this kind of mindset in order to regain some sense of what they are worth doing and what is their purpose for the next election. So I'm not so sure about what the Socialist Party would be able to do, because the Socialist Party is still under the influence of its founder, Mitterrand. But I would rather think that the Green, Les Verts, have some sort of leverage that they should use definitely for the first round.
And Elisabeth Moutet, if it isn't the far right in the second round, do you agree with Nassira Ghanif that the best chance the left has is with the Greens?
I think the Greens are going to be necessary if there has to be a coalition. I don't see them getting anywhere this time. It's going to be interesting to see what happens during the general election to the House 1 month after the presidential election, because it's very likely that even if Emmanuel Macron is well elected as president, re-elected, he will not have a majority in the House, because 4.5 years ago, he fielded all sorts of unknowns to become MPs in the French Parliament, and they are not MPs really. I mean, they are people who obey him, and they don't have the individuality and the experience of parliamentary work. The great majority of them, and some others he had picked and chosen from various parties on the right and on the left. It was his big slogan, I can do both parties at once. I think this time the traditional parties, including on the ground, the grassroots of the traditional left-wing parties, including the socialists, they will come back. So there will be a sort of fractured House where I think there will be a narrow Republican majority. And then alliances between the old parties like, the rump of the Socialist Party, of the Communist Party, of the France Insoumise, will need the Greens to if not gain the majority, at least create ad hoc coalitions on issues.
So Emmanuel Rivière, Macron wins the popularity contest next April, but then loses the parliamentary elections?
Well, I can't be sure about that, because parliamentary elections in France are now mostly confirmations election with a very low turnout, 50% of the voters.
Yeah, it's a rubber stamp parliament, and the president's effective because he says, I won, give me a mandate.
Yes, what is important to have in mind is that France is in the middle of a complete restructuration of its political landscape. And probably the next presidential election will be a new significant step of this restructuration. And around the elected president, a new majority will be built. It can be around Emmanuel Macron. It's not 100% certain. The difficulty, as Yves Saint-Omer said, is that it's for the presidential election. And in France, the president has to be in some way the heir of Charles de Gaulle, and beyond that of the French kings. And it's difficult for some parties, in particular for the Greens, because the way they do politics doesn't fit with this representation of the power. So it's very particular, because there is only one seat, and it leads to a very divided debate, ending with two, and with a very divided country, probably in some aspects artificially divided. If we had another electoral laws, if we have another electoral system, probably the political landscape and the political climate wouldn't be the same as now.
All right, still a lot of time before France elects its next Republican king. I want to thank you, Emmanuel Rivière. I want to thank Yves Saint-Omer for being with us from Oxford, Nassira Ghanif, and Elisabeth Moutet. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.